Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. We have more gaming and PlayStation news, rumours and leaks to go over. A huge shout out to the God of War and Uncharted channel members, and if you enjoyed today's video, please show your support by hitting that like button. So we're starting off today with Sony predicting a massive year for its PlayStation division. Sony is gearing up for a potential significant year in terms of first-party software sales for the PlayStation 5. Sony has projected an increase in sales of its exclusive titles driven by a robust lineup of anticipated releases. Amongst the standout titles slated for release are Death Stranding 2 on the beach, which is set to launch in June of this year, and Ghost of Yotei arriving later in October. Sony also has other promising titles on the horizon, such as Lost Soul Aside, which was delayed and is now coming out later in the year. We also have Marathon, which is really a flip of a coin in terms of whether it will be successful or not, and of course the PC release of Stellar Blade. And also within the next 12 months, we know we're going to get GTA 6 coming out this time next year, so a lot to look forward to. However, in its most recent financial report, Sony predicted a decline in PS5 hardware sales for the upcoming fiscal year, but expressed confidence that this downturn will be offset by a rise in first-party and third-party software sales. The company's focus on expanding its software portfolio could prove to be a pivotal move, especially as it seeks to strengthen its position in the live service sector. Over the 12-month period ending 31st March 2025, Sony reported sales of 28.9 million first-party games, as accounting for approximately 10% of the 303 million software units sold overall for the PS5. With its upcoming releases, the company is optimistic about improving these figures, particularly as microtransactions continue to be the major revenue driver. And I know that's not what people who love single-player games want to hear. I certainly don't want to hear that, but it is a driving force within the strategy. The emphasis on live service titles underscores Sony's strategic shift towards monetizing ongoing player engagement, rather than relying solely on single-purchase games. Sony has also disclosed that the PlayStation 5 shipments have now reached 77.8 million units globally, with 2.8 million units sold in the last quarter alone. However, despite the overall growth, hardware sales in the fourth quarter declined by 1.7 million units year on year. Nonetheless, PlayStation Network recorded a notable increase in monthly active users, climbing to 124 million as of March 31st, 2025. This represents a growth of 6 million users compared to the same period last year. And for context, PlayStation 5's sales trajectory is closely mirroring that of the PS4, which remains a benchmark for Sony's console success. Since its launch in November 2020, despite the challenges of COVID-19, the PS5 has remained in high demand, despite persistent stock shortages and supply chain disruptions. Now, as the console becomes more widely available, Sony is betting on a slate of major game releases and potential PS5 Pro bundles, particularly those tied to major franchises like GTA 6, to further drive hardware sales in the coming fiscal year. In terms of digital versus physical sales, Sony has continued to witness a growing shift towards downloadable content. The share of digital sales has now risen to 76%, up from 70% of the previous year, indicating a clear trend towards digital consumption. Unfortunately, I say that as someone who loves buying physical content. Looking ahead, Sony is preparing for a slight dip in hardware, we know that, but projecting a rise in first-party software sales. And now the upcoming release of Death Stranding 2 and Ghost of Yotei are expected to contribute significantly to this increase, along with other games set to debut within the next year or so. Now, whether these releases will be enough to offset the hardware sales decline remains to be seen, but I suspect it will, especially when GTA 6 lands and those console bundles go flying out. But Sony's strategy clearly focuses on capitalizing on its exclusive content and expanding its presence within live service gaming. Now, I still say that the GTA 6 release, which we know is, GTA comes out once in a generation, right? 2013 it last came out, so we're talking, when it comes out in 2026, 13 years since it last came out. I know it's had a couple of remasters and releases on other consoles, but once in a generation game, you bundle that with a PS5, that kind of opportunity PlayStation and Sony will not miss. This alone will shift millions of units of PlayStation 5s and PS5 Pros, enough to push the PS5 hardware sales ahead of the PS4 hardware sales by the end of 2026. And whilst we're on the subject of Sony selling consoles, consider this. Sony has recently confirmed that it is contemplating further price increases for the PlayStation 5 console and potentially shifting its manufacturing operation to the United States. This development is largely a response to the tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump, which continue to impact the company's bottom line. As part of its financial outlook for the upcoming fiscal year, Sony indicated that it anticipates approximately 100 billion yen, which is roughly $650 million in tariff-related costs. That is absolutely extortionate. And to mitigate this financial burden, who's going to carry that cost? That's right, you and me, the consumers. Sony's chief financial officer, Lin Tao, stated that the company is considering passing these additional costs onto consumers. That strategy will not only affect the PS5, but could extend across Sony's entire product lineup. So every product under Sony's banner looks like is going up to bring in some kind of additional revenue to cover the cost of that $650 million related to tariff costs. Sony's CEO, Hiroki Totoki, mentioned that moving PlayStation 5 production to the United States is under consideration. Totoki suggested that producing the console domestically in the United States could be an effective strategy to bypass the impact of these tariffs. The shift in manufacturing location would mark a significant strategic change for Sony, as the company traditionally produces its gaming hardware in regions like Japan, Taiwan, and China. And since the launch of the PlayStation 5 in 2020, the console's price trajectory has diverged from that of previous PlayStation generations. Instead of seeing a gradual decrease over time, the PlayStation 5 has experienced multiple price increases, particularly in regions like here in the UK, across Europe and Australia. Last month, the base PlayStation 5 digital edition saw a price increase of £40 in the UK and €50 across Europe. Similarly, the cost of the PlayStation 5 Plus subscription has also risen across several markets over the past month. And despite these price adjustments, the PS5 has continued to perform well in terms of sales. As mentioned earlier, Sony recently announced that it had sold over 77 million units since its release in 2020. I think by now we're all expecting Sony to increase the price of its console at some point. We know it's happening, especially considering the price of the Nintendo Switch 2 and the recent Xbox price increases. So I'd expect Sony to increase it at some point. It was only a matter of time that this was going to happen. And with so much money being spent on tariff charges, it looks like it's going to be the consumers, you and I, that are going to be footing the bill. Let me know your thoughts, guys, and let's move on. As I mentioned a few days ago, Sony is reportedly preparing to roll out a significant update for the PlayStation 5 Pro, one that could potentially elevate gaming performances on the Pro to a new height. The update is said to center around PSSR, and according to a known leaker, Moore's Law is dead, a major overhaul of PSSR is currently in the works at PlayStation. The anticipated update is being referred to as PSSR 2, suggesting that the enhancements could be substantial enough to warrant a newer version number. The core of the rumoured PSSR update is the capability for developers to run their games at lower native resolutions, whilst allowing the advanced AI-driven upscaling to maintain or even enhance visual quality. Essentially, the improved PSSR would handle the image quality, while the developers can allocate more system resources towards the performance metrics such as frame rates. The speculation goes even further, claiming that Sony is targeting gameplay at 4K resolution and 120 frames per second, and potentially 8K at 60 frames per second, a leap that would be a game changer if achieved. And while PSSR has already demonstrated its capabilities in several PS5 titles, such as the most recent Ubisoft game Assassin's Creed Shadows, where it has successfully maintained 60 frames per second whilst improving visual fidelity, it is worth noting that the technology requires proper implementation by the developers. As we've seen with the recent Doom: The Dark Ages game, when it was reviewed, or previewed rather, by Digital Foundries, the tech guys, they were clearly referencing where the game had failed to be properly optimized for the PS5 Pro. Now, I'm not by any means suggesting that any developer would deliberately not try to optimize a game for a particular platform, but clearly the guys over at Xbox were focusing on optimizing the game for the Xbox platform. However, since it's coming out onto the PlayStation 5 Pro, it clearly is not optimized for the system. And that shows with the comparisons that were done by the guys over at Digital Foundry. So the games that are coming out on the Pro need to be implemented properly by the developers. Otherwise, there's no point releasing it onto the PlayStation 5 Pro. What this means is that not every game is automatically given a performance boost simply because PSSR 2 is available. The developers need to do their part to ensure the game has been developed with PSSR in mind and that it is implemented correctly. Still, the potential impact of this update could be significant, particularly as Sony continues to explore ways to enhance the gaming experiences ahead of the next console generation. We are going to be hearing more and more updates about this supposed PSSR update, this new version, as we get closer to Sony officially confirming that they're actually indeed in the middle of a massive PSSR update. What are your thoughts on PSSR Pro, the implementation, and the upgrade to this system? What games best demonstrate the PSSR Pro enhancement for you so far? Let me know in the comments and let's move on. Square Enix has announced a new partnership with TBS Television to develop a game based on a brand new intellectual property. TBS is widely recognized as the broadcaster behind the popular Ninja Warrior series known as Sasuke in Japan. And now the company is venturing into game development under the brand TBS Games. The collaboration with Square Enix aims to combine the creative and technological expertise of both companies to produce a new title aimed at both domestic and international markets. And while specific details about the game or this venture have not been disclosed, the focus will be on creating a compelling new IP that leverages the strengths of both Square Enix and TBS in the entertainment sector. Given Square Enix's extensive experience in developing successful RPG franchises, there is speculation that this new title could follow a similar path. However, with TBS's involvement, the project could also feature unique elements inspired by reality-based challenges or competitive gameplay. Maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe it's a combination of Ninja Warrior and RPG elements. What are your thoughts Square Enix could be working on? And whilst we're on the subject of Square Enix, they have officially launched a comprehensive 3-year reboot plan aimed at shifting its focus from producing a high volume of games to prioritizing higher quality titles. This strategic change, which was initially announced in May 2024, is now underway and is expected to conclude by the end of the fiscal year ending March 2027. During its latest financial report, Square Enix elaborated on its intention to establish a mid to long-term pipeline focused on producing fewer but higher quality games. The company is actively optimizing its operations to align with this vision by restructuring its development process and re-evaluating its project lineup. According to Square Enix, the move involves consolidating resources and focusing on key intellectual properties, particularly its flagship franchises like Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts. One of the critical aspects of the reboot plan includes streamlining development by placing objects under the management of the same studios, thereby reducing the outsourcing of titles. This internal restructuring allows for a more cohesive production approach, with accumulated knowledge and expertise remaining within the company. It just sounds like common sense to me, to be fair. I mean, not being funny, but you'd expect something like that would already happen with such a big and well-established studio. The company has stated that it has also implemented strategies to improve the profitability of current titles through platform expansion, diversified payment methods, and optimized operating costs. The impact of this new strategy has already begun to take shape. In its recent financial update, Square Enix confirmed the cancellation of several projects deemed incompatible with its quality over quantity focus. Among these projects was Kingdom Hearts Missing Link, which is a mobile game that was officially cancelled. However, the company remains committed to major projects such as Kingdom Hearts 4 and the next chapter in the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, both of which are expected to launch by 2027. Square Enix is expanding its AAA game portfolio to include multiple platforms, ensuring that its biggest titles reach wider audiences. This shift was highlighted with the announcement that Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade will be coming to the upcoming Nintendo Switch 2, underscoring the publisher's intention to maximize the reach of its flagship titles. Square Enix's approach reflects a significant departure from its previous strategy of churning out numerous titles in quick succession. By scaling back the number of projects and reallocating resources to core IPs, the company aims to not only enhance game quality, but also stabilize its financial outlook in the long term. The success of this 3-year reboot plan will be closely monitored as the company works to establish a more sustainable and profitable production model, ultimately positioning itself for consistent releases of high quality multi-platform titles. Let's hope it works. I mean, in essence, it makes sense, right? Focus on quality rather than quantity, and the gamers in general will appreciate it. Like I said, it just sounds like common sense. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and let's move on to some really depressing news. Microsoft has announced yet another round of layoffs, a move that could impact its gaming division, including Xbox, Bethesda, and the recently acquired Activision Blizzard. According to a report from CNBC, the tech giant plans to cut approximately 3% of its workforce, equating to around 6,840 employees, nearly 7,000 employees, as part of its ongoing efforts to streamline operations and reduce management layers. This marks the third significant wave of layoffs at Microsoft since January 2023. The previous rounds of cuts primarily affected game development studios and engineering teams, including significant layoffs at 343 Industries, the developers behind Halo Infinite, as well as other areas such as HoloLens. In January 2024, Microsoft announced a gaming-specific round of layoffs, which included 1,900 staff across Xbox, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard. The reduction in workforce was reportedly part of a strategy to align resources with business priorities and identified overlapping roles after the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Phil Spencer, the head of Microsoft Gaming, addressed the layoffs in a message to staff, emphasizing that the decision was necessary to maintain a sustainable cost structure amid broader economic challenges. He stated that Microsoft and Activision Blizzard set priorities, identified areas of overlap, and ensured that we're all aligned on the best opportunities for growth. As of now, it remains unclear how the latest round of layoffs will specifically affect the gaming division. However, the move highlights the challenges Microsoft faces as it seeks to integrate Activision Blizzard while navigating economic uncertainties and restructuring its gaming operations. I know businesses all have these targets that they need to meet, and I'm fully aware of this as a business owner. But honestly, Microsoft, a company valued at over $3 trillion, could surely absorb these costs. But no, they want more profit. They want to reach a $4 trillion market valuation. They must be so bloated if they can afford to make a third round of redundancies, laying off nearly 7,000 employees. It's the cost of all these acquisitions. They need to pull that money back from somewhere. I mean, they've spent $100 billion on acquisitions over recent years, and they need to claw that money back. And it's certainly not coming from their Xbox gaming division. What are your thoughts, guys? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.